Thank you again for joining me on the Southern Report. It is a real pleasure for me to be able to sit down and converse on this platform. I know I say this every time when I look and say, I'm about to bring on an incredible guest, but I am about to bring on an incredible guest, and I'm very grateful for his time. And I'm going to bring on Major Mike Shearer now. I am going to read his bio, not because I want to embarrass him at all, but one of the important things that where we have reached, even though we have a world that doesn't value experience, is that actually experience is everything. And that's why we gain that. Major Mike Shearer, Mike, I just want to thank you so much for joining me. I know we've just had a few technical runarounds to actually get here, but I am very, very grateful for your time, and it's lovely to see you, sir.
Pleasure, Mark.
And I don't mean this is not to embarrass you, but this is really important. One of the things about people's bios is because it lays out who people are, and experience cannot be denied, even though, as we know, within the kind of propaganda war that we are dealing with in so many different fields, people want to deny that. So Mike Shearer is a former career cavalry soldier who saw service during the Cold War, patrolling in a tank in Germany and in active service in the Gulf a number of times, Cyprus, Bosnia and Northern Ireland. In 2007, Mike was the director of the Press Office Centre and later head of strategic influence and communications for the British military, working from the American embassy in Baghdad. After leaving the army, Mike worked in the Defence Directorate for communications in the Ministry of Defence as the principal plans officer for Afghanistan and the ministry communications lead for the NATO Summit. In 2016, Mike returned to Iraq to join the battle against the Islamic State, running influence operations out of Baghdad and Iraqi Kurdistan for the Pentagon. After that, he joined M&C Saatchi as the director for business operations on a behavioural change project called Transform until its conclusion in 2019. Mike was encouraged to support a museum charity with his influence and communication skills, where he was the director of fundraising operations for the Museum for Military Intelligence. He has a deep sense of fair play and is currently often seen on British news outlets as a thought leader, commenting on war and wider military defence issues. He is a strong advocate in support of Israel, particularly regarding their current fight against Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthis, and the Shia Militants in Iraq, other militant groups in Syria, Arabs in Judea and Samaria, and of course their paymaster and puppet master, Iran. Mike, thank you. I'm sorry. I hope that I did you proud in reading that out and didn't do too much of a mouthful overspill. But thank you. But thank you so much for joining me, because we are going to discuss a subject that's very dear to your heart and is very dear to mine, which is Israel and all that has been going on since 7th of October 2023 and those appalling atrocities where 1,250 Israeli citizens were murdered, killed in such barbarity that many people, we can't even show that, even though we may agree that needs to be in cinemas all over the country, because then people will realize what we're up against, and also taking 250 hostages. Mike, thank you. My first question to you, sir, where are we at in this propaganda war? What are some of the biggest things that we are having to deal with, particularly in the last few weeks, before we go back to the 7th of October 2023, in your opinion, sir?
Well, Mark, what I would say is that our innocent nation, for want of a better expression, has been led by the nose by a leftist agenda, mainly mainstream media outlets. It takes a fair bit of reading to understand the history of Israel and the region in order to draw proper conclusions. And I'm afraid, from what I see, is our media are idle. It's much easier for them to go for sound bites, they will see people on the streets of London and beyond waving Palestinian flags with the mantra from the river to the sea. Now, for the lazy and the idle, that is easy for people to understand. And so you've already now got a bit of a win for Hamas, this terror group, because they're winning the information war. The public, of course, when I said our innocent public, in many respects, you have to give them a little bit of latitude because they think they're watching the news, when in fact what they're reading is a very pointed agenda towards basically the bad guys. The reality, of course, is much more complex than from the river to the sea. It is, and I need to declare, I have no skin in the game with this except fair play. I'm an atheist, so I really do come from an objective corner on it. But when you recognize that that in 1948, only one state emerged from the British mandate, and that was Israel, the notions that are set out by UN et al. And our media groups that that there is occupation by Israel in what they refer to as the West Bank, and indeed in Gaza. The reality is you cannot illegally occupy your own country. So just as a top headline as to where the whole problem with the narrative is, it really sits with that. It sits with our media outlets using terms like the occupation of the West Bank, when in fact Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, is actually just another part of the territory of Israel.
And the clue, if you do have faith, and I declare I do, the clue is Judah is Jewish tribe, and Jesus is a Jew. So we're just put that on the table as well. Mike, this may seem a stupid question. Why do you think people are so lazy and will, in regard, as you said, the media class, and will not investigate this? What has happened within our media?
Look, I think at some level they're being driven by the United Nations, which I believe actually needs a root and branch reform. The United Nations, from the outset, with the formation of the Israeli state, have always made comment about a Palestinian state. Now, you could get into this for hours, but the reality is that under international customary law, only one state emerged, despite, by the way, a two-state partition being offered to the Arabs back in the day. They refused that, and the only state that emerged was Israel. And under this international customary law, and the part of that law is known as uti possidetis juris. That means that the state that is emerging inherits in its entirety the boundaries that were set before its independence, when it's shaking off either the yoke of imperial or an imperial power, or indeed a mandate. So when you have the UN, who were at the time a respected body, I have precious little respect for them today, then you can see why the media classes would maybe be inclined to join in with that narrative.
Well, the amazing Natasha Hulshoff of UK Lawyers for Israel, expert on that, she just affirms what you have totally said, which is when a nation state is then formed, it is within the formation, as you've said, within the barriers, within those borders that have already been set out. The point I'll make at this point is that the British government at that time then gave away 78% of the land that was promised to the Jewish people at that time. There was only 22% left. And of course, they then created Transjordan, that has become Jordan, which actually is where the home is for this whole thing of disputed Arab people. That may be offensive to some, because we have to go back to 1948 and remember that how there were 4 or 5 nations then declared war as soon as Israel declared its independence on May the 14th, 1948. They then declared war, and Jordan then took that side of Israeli land in regard to Jerusalem, and then in 1967, the eastern Jerusalem is then taken back in that six day war. I don't mean to bore people with history, but history and facts are really, really important. And you've talked about the UN. The UN as a body has, the amount of criticism it has put, objections raised against Israel is there is no other country that has got so many objections, Mike. So when you are in the media, when you are on a certain channel, sofa, etc., what is the biggest question that you are coming against constantly? Are you then having to lay out facts time and time again? Is this what you are then finding?
Yes. And Mark, I mean, you just mentioned quite rightly that if you really wanted to go for this cry of a two-state solution, you've got the Hashemites, which were given Transjordan, now Jordan, and Israel, which was given Israel as we have it today. I would just make the point that the Israelis were actually and are very happy to entertain their Arab cousins, for want of a better expression. They have offered time and time again their Arab neighbors the opportunity to either live peacefully. Let's just look at Gaza. When the Israelis pulled every single living and dead Israeli out of Gaza to allow the opportunity for the Arabs to live there peacefully. It's not working. It didn't work as we've seen. But I would just make the point that there are some Arabs that live very comfortably and peacefully along their Israeli, not their Israeli, their Jewish friends and neighbors. 20% of Israel are non-Jewish. They're Arabs, they're Druze, they're Christians, and there are other secular designs there that live very peacefully. People forget that there were 2 independent judges at separate times, Arab Israelis. So just get your mind around that term, because it exists. Arab Israelis who have jailed former prime minister and a former president, as I say, on separate occasions. So it works. This ability to live alongside another religious minded individual is proven. So if the notion now of what people generally refer to when they speak of a two-state solution is in fact a two-state delusion, because there is so much bitterness that has been bred into the culture of the Arabs now that live in Judea and Samaria and in Gaza. They teach their children to the Fatah, curriculum, which has children, kinder-aged children, being taught how to martyr themselves as they grow. And that's the way to get to heaven, by killing and disrupting Jews. In addition to that, they have a pay-to-slay program. This is happening as we speak. So if you live in Judea and Samaria, or as I call it, the West Bank, and you go out and you cause mayhem to the Jewish communities there, then you get given a sum of money. If you end up killing them, you get more money. If you end up killing a number, you get more money. If you get imprisoned because of this, then your family get money. This is barbaric. This is an uncivilized enemy that is sitting on the doorstep of Israel. And again, I just make the point that while all that is good on, some of those people, by the way, were part of UNRWA, this UN body, that were part of teaching these children this stuff. And indeed, some of them which were involved in the 7th of October atrocities. There are major problems with this. So that two-state solution, unless they genuinely do go to Jordan, but I doubt that will happen, because guess what? The Jordanians don't want them. The only way I can see this progressing peacefully is to obliterate Hamas, either kill or evacuate, expel them, and then for the Israelis to administer both Gaza and Judea and Samaria. And I would think that after perhaps a couple of generations, those Arabs may become a bit more amiable and think, you know what, this isn't too bad. They're not stopping us going to pray. They're not stopping us doing any of our traditional Arab culture things. And actually, we've now got a vote in the land which is known as Israel's. They just need to think about becoming Israeli Arabs.
Mike, let's have a recap. I mean, I was in Jordan and Israel in May. And at that time, the crackdowns within Jordan had begun well before that in regard to the Muslim Brotherhood. We had even come across, of course, security stops, etc. Got no problem with that. The story of the Muslim Brotherhood is very, 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 very important within this ideology. But what you've said is absolutely right. So let's just quickly go back to, or not quickly, go back to what the Israelis have then discovered in Gaza. So up until 1967, Egypt was in charge. Israel then becomes in charge after winning the 6-Day War. Virtually, you know.
Let me stop you there, Mark. You're quite right. But they weren't just in charge. They were occupying Israeli territory. I think that's important to point out.
No, absolutely. And also that the fact that they were so far into the Sinai, if not on the way to Cairo, this whole thing of, well, we just want peace, we give up land, we have tried to work this out. Let's remember that Sinwar was in an Israeli prison, was then released. Let's remind ourselves that Sinwar at one point, I think, either had a cancerous tumor, was either operated on and in an Israeli hospital, etc., within all of this. And then as you quite rightly say, they withdraw in 2005. They've elected, they've had elections, and then they've elected Hamas after destroying all the greenhouses, all the opportunities to have businesses there that the Israelis left behind, people actually raising, through a connection I know of, you know, a businessman even raising a lot of money to then provide for that, to say, you can have these businesses, this would be great, which they all wrecked. And then they turn it into a rocket launcher pad, and the rest is history. Mike, why don't people know this? Sorry if that's totally naive. I come back to this again. Why will people not look at this? Why will they not know this? Because I am convinced that our country would not tolerate this on their doorstep. And with what the IDF then found out is that they built a tunnel system with the world's money, with European money, American money, other people donating in there. They build a tunnel system that's the equivalent of the New York subway, if not nearly the equivalent of the London Underground. And
Yeah.
they're still being vilified. What say you, sir?
Well, I'm afraid, again, it's to the untrained eye, Mark. If when October, the atrocities happened of October 7, this genocidal kind of assault on peaceful people having, song and dance and merriment, and everybody in shock horror at the time thought that was appalling. But day by day, the media have turned this into a competition of victimhood. Now, what I mean by that is when the world found that some 1,250 people had been slaughtered and abused at that time, as soon as the number of the dead, whether they be Hamas, whether they be civilian, when that number crept above that number, it now looks like the aggressor are the Israelis. But I reiterate, that is to the untrained eye. You've got to understand a little bit about what the law of armed conflict says. And in brief, the law of armed conflict is about necessity, proportionality, distinction, and precaution. But let's just speak about the one that everybody generally gets wrong in the media, and it's proportionality. So when they say now, look, the Hamas have only killed on that day 1,200 something people, and now we're into the tens of thousands of Gazans. This competition of victimhood, you see how it easily comes in. They say that's wrong, but let's talk about what proportionality means. And then alongside that, you get collateral damage, civilian deaths. It's and then inventions. It's illegal to have civilian deaths in war. No, it's not. It's not ideal, and it's not what a professional army go out to do. But if you're fighting an uncivilized enemy who are hiding amongst the public, then of course there is inevitably going to be civilian casualties. With proportionality, it's all about military advantage. So if what the Israeli Defense Force are doing is giving them the military advantage to meet their military objective, then it's proportional. So if, as is the case, Hamas's stated objective is to obliterate every single Israeli from the planet, then you can see why the IDF, who takes this very seriously, Israel have been through this before during the Holocaust, the Israelis, the Jews. So they take this very seriously. So their objective is the destruction of Hamas. Many people say that's an unrealistic objective. I don't agree with that. I think it is a realistic objective, either to destroy them in place and or expel them from Israeli land, which I remind everybody again is Gaza. And so I'm afraid this notion of victimhood to the untrained eye sees a bundle over here of dead people, and it's bigger than that bundle, and therefore they're going to side with this lot. I would say that on this particular thing, the Israeli Defense Force are probably the most professional military right now on this planet. Every civilian death to the IDF is a tragedy. It is a tragedy. To Hamas, it's an information campaign strategy, and that's the difference.
Absolutely. And as someone pointed out on the Jewish News Syndicate, in a fantastic interview done by Danny Seaman over there on his show Straight Up, and he interviewed the gentleman that was talking about the fact that the whole Palestinian propaganda war then set in motion 30 years ago, and that in regard to, of course, the funding from Qatar et al., but it's how it then integrated into universities around the world. We look over here and we look in America, and actually then buying influence. For many of us, we had not been aware of that, but this distinctive campaign to then do that, and as you quite rightly say, to then create this victimhood. Mike, let's remind ourselves that they were already calling on October the 8th, if not on October the 7th, for the Israeli restraint. They were calling for the IDF restraint. There was rallies outside the Israeli embassy in the Ukraine and in the UK and Freudian slip and elsewhere. So this is what we're dealing with. Remind ourselves as well is that from Gaza they were just firing rockets for many years, and we remind ourselves of the hostages pictures that were put up in London and people delighting in taking those down and coming out with comments like Haiba and all the rest about Jewish people being behind trees, referring to tropes historically. So, Mike, within the last month, how has this whole, Gaza is starving, food is not going in enough, the fact that the Israelis are feeding their enemy, they're feeding them at the same time. Well, they're trying to save civilian lives. They're feeding them at the same time. So how has the whole food crisis been weaponized by Hamas and also by the UN in your eyes?
Well, I think because, again, it's all about victimhood. Look, I've seen, everybody will have seen these terrible pictures of these little children that look like they are starving. And you get a mother who looks completely healthy and well fed. And then the reports come out afterwards that actually the child had underpinning medical problems, and it wasn't starving. It was the child had other issues. That's why it looked as bad as it did. When I see the various clips on the television of the Gazans, they don't look like they're starving to me. But that aside, it is not for the Israelis to feed their enemy. I put a small caveat on that. I don't think the Israelis do not look at the civilian Arabs in Gaza as their enemy. They've bent over backwards, my goodness, to try and give them a swathe of ground that they could just live peacefully in. But then, of course, they voted in a crowd of gangsters, for want of a better expression, and their lot has not been good. And now the feeding of the Gazans, while the Israeli Defense Force do not get in the way of it, it is not their responsibility to do it. And I think they've gone out of their way to do what they can. And then you get the UN and other bleeding heart agencies saying, we're not getting in, it's too dangerous. Well, you can't have it both ways. Either go and feed them, or stop pretending that you're being stopped by the IDF, because you can't have it both ways.
No, and the UN trucks go in. They are hijacked by Hamas. We've seen the pictures of the gunmen on top. So the amount of money they have then made in selling the food that they have stolen, that's supposed to be there given free to the people of Gaza, they steal that. They're making money out of that, which is feeding their equivalent of their own military industrial complex over and over again. So where the Gaza Humanitarian Fund, where has that come into this, Mike? Which is that working between America and the IDF to basically take that money-making machine out of the equation.
Yeah, I mean, how that is going to end up, I'm afraid I don't have an answer for it. Look, the point is that the US and the Israelis have now lent in here to do a job, certainly the Israelis, to do a job that they're not required to do. They're not required to do that. So it just, again, it shows just how decent
Yes.
the Israelis have been with this. They are thinking about the civilian population. Whenever they're going on an operation, they do more than any other army has ever done up until now to tell the civilian population where to go, when to go, and where to steer clear of. But the big overarching part to this, we can't speak about this, Mark, without remembering where it is underpinned. And to me, my view is that the Abraham Accords that were initiated by Donald Trump in 2020, which had basically got on side some of Israel's Arab neighbors, UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, Sudan, and we're in deep talks, progressive talks with Saudi Arabia. Now, that all sounds good, does it not?
Yes.
But who wouldn't have thought that was good? And of course, that would be Iran. And so I think the timing of this is more than likely, not wanting to sound conspiratorial about this, is that Iran have thought enough of this. You know, we've got these Arab nations now on set, as I've said, the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, Sudan, and now we're in talks with Saudi Arabia. Enough is enough. And my own view is, I don't think I'd be too far off the mark to presume, not assume, with some calculated thought that that's what probably prompted from Iran to Hamas to get involved back in October 7th.
Do you want to talk about what has happened to the Iranian Ring of Fire and their proxies? Because if we go from the 7th of October till now, some pretty major events,
yes, indeed,
have occurred. Do you want to go through that?
Well, I mean, first of all, it starts, of course, with, as you said, there's always been drip with this. So there is never really a stable time of peace, because there's always something coming at the Israeli state from somewhere. But you can put your finger on the moment where it really kicked off again, and that was October 7th. And then at the same time, within 24 hours, you have Hezbollah coming from their northern border. All the while, by the way, the northern border, which should have been being patrolled and watched by, again, the UN there, we've since found that there were tunnels and underground real estate, not just tunnels. Now, some of these things were 100 meters away from a UN observation tower. They must have, it's inconceivable that the UN soldiers that were there supposedly monitoring this this area of no-go for either side, the Israelis or indeed Hezbollah. They must have seen this going on. And again, thousands of rockets coming. And then, of course, we can't miss out the Houthis in Yemen, who then start launching missiles from there. It's just been staggering. In my opinion, really too much patience has been given to Iran over the years. And I would encourage our Western leaders and democracies to coalesce and get involved and make a coalition with our Arab neighbors. And they need to deal with the regime in Iran properly and once and for all. They need to set free those great Persian people, and allow them to live a life that they would enjoy rather than under the boot of the Ayatollah Khomeini and the IRGC. I mean, the Islamic Republican Guard Corps, by the way, the United Kingdom haven't even yet prescribed them as a terror group.
Absolutely.
Which is why just months ago, MI5 picked up, I think, about half a dozen of them in London, just at the last moment before they were going to execute terror on innocent civilian people. Now, if we prescribe them, then I think rather than wait until the last minute, and you might get it wrong, MI5 and other security services should just go and collect these people and lock them away. But it's a nonsense that we still haven't yet prescribed them, as many other countries have, as a terrorist group.
I hear you loudly, and let's just can we make a comment of what has just happened, being released and reported on in regard to that in Australia over the last few days, where they have then, I think they've just asked the Iranian ambassador to leave Australia and other diplomats, because they have then proven the tie-up between the IRGC and appalling events that have happened in regard to a Jewish synagogue and in regard to a restaurant that happened last October. Mike, this has now all come out.
It's even much bigger than that. I found out a couple of years ago now, I was speaking with some friends about going to do some work in the Caribbean with trying to stomp out the drug peddling that goes on there. And underpinning all of that, guess who? The Islamic Republican Guard Corps. Who thought it? But it's basically chipping away at the fabric of Western civilization life. Because guess what? Once Iran would be done with the West, it would then start on the other Arab nations that don't hold their particular theme of Islam. So basically, the Sunnis and any other sect of the Arab religion would be picked off one by one thereafter.
So in that regard, it's not too much of a stretch to actually say that that Israel, I've said it, that are fighting on behalf of all of us that believe in the values that we do. Is that a fair comment?
I think so. But look, Israel are a buffer state for the world, not just for the West. I mean, Israel are basically containing the Iranians from really going after other Arab nations that are not of the same. They are Shiites. So unless you are subscribed to their particular theme of Islam, they're eventually coming for you. That's where it is. That's why I would like to really encourage our Western leaders and our other Arab friends to get together and deal with this. I mean, you can put your finger on where the problem lies. An old friend that I used to work with in the American embassy, a U.S. naval captain, said to me quite recently, he said, Mike, if you're walking down the street and a man attacks you with a glove puppet and he's beating you around the head, you don't attack the glove puppet. You deal with the man. And I'm afraid the same analogy can be set here. So all these other proxies, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, that part of Iraq that will now and again scream in support, go for the money, go for the puppet master, and that is the Ayatollah and his henchmen in the IRGC.
And when you're talking about Hezbollah, we remind ourselves of the incredible pager operation that the Israelis undertook. And also when you're talking about Hezbollah, the fact, because of what was happening in the north, there were 80,000, I think, evacuation of 80,000 Israeli citizens from that area because from what was coming in as well. I'm just saying this to point out what they have had to put up with. Which is, I don't think you and I had a conversation on the phone before having this wonderful interview, and I don't know if have we got the mental capacity to put up with that kind of thing within our own country. I admire how they do it. It's phenomenal. It really is.
I salute the Israeli people for their resilience. They have been quite extraordinary, but they don't have a choice. That's the reality of it. They have to persevere because this is a matter of life and death. When someone tells you, as Hamas have, that their preoccupation is your destruction in its entirety, they're going to take notice because people have tried to do this to them before.
Well, in history, Romans destroying the second temple, being expelled from their land to the diaspora. We go through this. Was why many of us use that phrase, that Israel may be 77 years young, but actually 3,500 years old. And this is what it's about. There's always been Jewish people in the land. That's it. Period. I would.
But when you put that alongside, you're quite right, Mark. But when you put that alongside this notion of the Palestinians, look, this is the bit that really irritates me when I'm watching the news way too frequently, and they talk about the Palestinians like they are like it's a state. I mean, the UN have given the Palestinians observer status in the UN, but who are they? Look, unless you go back 2,500 years ago, and you come from Crete, the island of Crete, they were the boat people that set up alongside part of the Levant, just really north of the Gaza Strip and a bit below it. So unless you're Cretan or of Greek ancestry, you are not a Palestinian. And the land that was called Palestine as part of the British mandate was the land. It was a swathe of ground. It was never and has never been a state. And again, I reiterate, the only thing that emerged from the British mandate was Israel. That's it.
And that is what that whole term is then thrown against us. And then we have to go back to Yasser Arafat, really from 1964, pushing this whole thing of Palestinian victimism, of victimization, and our point viewers out to the incredible Einat Wilf and her whole thing is just saying that Yasser Arafat then inventing Palestinianism, because this is then what we are doing. People don't want to hear that. They don't want to hear about the Grand Mufti then turning around and saying, well, you know, Hitler, go and deal with the Jews in Europe, and then you need to deal with them in the Middle East, because the Iranian ideology says for our Mahdi to come back and the end of the world and to seek paradise, we have to wipe off every single Jew in the world. And the issue that we have to, as you pointed out, we have to remind ourselves in that incredible poem that thought we are next, because they fundamentally want to undermine the whole of Western civilization. Mike, on that sort of note, in the last sort of 5-6 minutes, where do we go from here? What should those of us that are really trying to push against this whole propaganda narrative, what should we be doing? What are the issues that we feel that are going to come up? I mean, we're very aware that the prime, I have to use the title, the Prime Minister of the UK, Keir Starmer, has then turned around and said, well, unless this war stops, we're going to recognize the two Palestinian state. We've got France, we've got Canada, we've then got Albanese in Australia doing the same thing. Where are we going to go from here? What have we got to, other than pushing it back against that? What else should we be doing?
It's unbelievable that we have these Western leaders telling Israel and their IDF that they've got to stop almost winning for their peace. What I would suggest that everybody does is write to their member of parliament and point out that Israel were brought into a war that they didn't start.
Yeah.
That the objective of their sworn enemy is the obliteration of every single Israeli from the face of the earth, for every Jew, certainly starting with Israel itself. And that they must support Israel. There is this two-state solution, as I said a moment ago, it's for the birds. The only way that this will ever, in my opinion, really work out is if Fatah and indeed Hamas are expelled. Hamas this war could stop today. It isn't raging on because the Israeli Defense Force wanted to rage on. All Hamas have to do is put their weapons down, give the hostages back, and get out of Israel. Go and live in Qatar or find another home. That's what they need to do. Then the war would stop immediately. They are the aggressors. Let's not forget that. They are the aggressors. The Israelis are fighting for their lives. And so I would encourage everybody to write to their member of parliament and point these facts out. And we want to be on the right side of history here. And it isn't bending to the will of a prescribed terror group that is Hamas.
Absolutely. And it's quite shocking to see, as you've said, Western leaders that wish to do that. And thank you for a brilliant reminder. No, Israel did not start it. The war would have ended many months ago if all the hostages had been released, and very sadly, and also the bodies of the dead hostages were released. We remember that remember that family where there are two young children. The mother is murdered as well. I mean, the atrocities are beyond words, and we remind ourselves of how 4,000, just over 4,000 people then, the Hamas fighters and also civilians, prescribed civilians from Gaza, then crossed over on the 7th of October on that day. Mike, I just want to say it's been an utter delight to talk to you and to have this conversation, and just to broadly look in a very quick way and look at what has happened on the from the 7th of October until now. I'm appalled that our government, the Foreign Secretary, I have to use the name, David Lammy, then stands up and says we're going to refund UNRWA. They have been doing that since they've come in. The man seems to have no idea of what's happening on the ground at all. I suppose I have to refer to the fact that it must be a domestic political move. I'll throw that out there in regard to the sensibilities. Mike, is there anything else that you want to say? I don't know if you have a website. I do apologize, but I know that you make TV appearances. Where can people find your work, etc., if they wish to do so?
Well, GB News is the team that really does listen to this. I would get little audience, I'm afraid, in some of the other more leftist media outlets. But all I would encourage anybody to do is just read a little bit of the history, and fact check anything that I've said today. If there's something you've raised an eyebrow about and thought, really, is that right? I mean, even as we speak, the International Court of Justice has been opining on Israel and its basic rights to survive and live. And this is what then gets our governments excited, because they think, well, the International Courts of Justice are saying things, we should listen. They are an opinion. They are a political opinion. They are not a judgment. And yeah, in fact, at no time ever in the history of the Israeli state has the International Court of Justice ever put a judgment, a judicial kind of law for Israel to obey. They can only do that when they invoke Chapter 7 of the UN Charter, and that's never happened.
Just to remind ourselves from a dear friend of mine, Dr. Bernie, Aziz, who talks about being an international lawyer, expert in that, and Jewish, and then we'll talk about the fact that the IDF conforms to the Geneva Convention, and of course Hamas doesn't have to, because it's turning around and saying, well, we're not a proper army, just we're a bunch of terrorists. So we'll just put that in context as well. And as you've said about people reading around their issue, go back to Herzl, go back to the Zionist movement, go back to the Dreyfus case, go back to San Remo in 1922, look at the Peel Commission in 1936, go up to the UN then mandate, the recognition of Israel as a nation, 1947, then look at the founding of that, 47, 48, look at who actually started the war, look at the persecution in Hebron in 1929, who was then involved in that, the Grand Mufti. I'm not throwing these out to be clever. I'm throwing these out because people need to look at history, and the fact that we're even discussing, people even say, well, Israel's right to exist. The fact that hold on a minute, it's a nation state. That's it. Period. Why are you even using that phrase? Mike, I'm looking forward to sitting down with you again when you are free, because we've got some other important discussions to have. And I'm really, really grateful for your time. So thank you. And I'm sorry about some of the technical issues that we've had, but God willing, we've got around those. So I just want to thank you for your time, and I'm going to play us out. Thank you, sir.